And now let's welcome in our very special guest, Pro Football Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, former general manager of the Bills, Panthers, and Indianapolis Colts. That is Bill Polian. Bill, thank you so much for joining us on the Giants Huddle. First and foremost, I hope you and your family are safe and healthy in what's been a very difficult year.
Thank you very much. We are, thank God, and it's been a very difficult year for all of our fellow citizens, so we count ourselves very blessed to be okay.
Yeah, same here, Bill. And let me start here. As a former general manager and evaluator, what was the first thing that went through your mind when you saw what the training camp rules were going to be in 2020 following what was a non-existent in-person off-season program?
Well, my first thought really was, how do you make this work? The rules are what they are. They've been determined by the medical professionals. Dr. Sills is extremely well qualified and very dedicated, and the people that are working with him are the same. So the rules are what they are, and therefore, how do you make this work? So, there's any number of ways to approach it, but that was my first thought as to how we proceed going forward.
And these are the rules for the fans that might not know. Players can opt out by August 3rd if they so choose. Days 7 to 14, and that basically starts now as veterans report, will be all strength and conditioning with some walkthroughs. Then you'll have OTA-like padless practices on days 15 to 20. And then August 17th, Bill, will be the first time you have a chance to have padded practice. You can have a maximum of 14 before the regular season begins. No preseason games, of course. So as a general manager, how would that impact your ability to evaluate the players on your roster trying to put together your 53 and your practice squad?
Well, the ability to evaluate new players who are new to your roster is drastically limited. Keep in mind that, as we discussed this, it's against the background of rules that are in place for everybody's health. So nobody's arguing with the rules.
Of course.
The question is, how do you implement them? So the fact is that you're not going to have a lot of time to evaluate players. And an additional fact is that the young players will be very, very far behind. New players, rookies, miles behind because they haven't had OTAs, they haven't had an off-season program. They're in a position where all they really know is what they've learned in the virtual meetings and haven't done anything on the field. And as Bill Parcells famously said, and I've never forgotten, football is a game that you learn by playing. You can't learn it in a classroom. You have to learn it by playing. And as a result, they're going to be very far behind. So you chalk it up and say, look, let's figure out a way to put the best 53 we can on the field. And that unit is going to largely be made up of veteran players who know what they're doing, who've been through it before. And even they will be less than ideally prepared because they will not have had any preseason games. But this is not an ideal world, and everybody's operating under the same guidelines. So in that sense, it's a level playing field. But, I would immediately say to the coach, listen, we really can't count on any major infusion of energy or excitement or efficiency from the rookies. Let's go forward, assuming that they're very far behind.
Are there certain positions, Bill, that you think it's going to be even more difficult for rookies to integrate, and others where maybe you think they're going to have a better shot?
Well, I just came across some statistics the other day that go back through 2012, but they go all the way back to 93, the start of the salary cap era, so they're very valid. Rookies don't contribute at a winning level in less than 50% of the time at any position. Quarterback, it's 34%. So rookie quarterback, good luck. You're not going to have any efficiency there. But that's not news, is it?
No.
Not to Daniel Jones or anyone else around the Giants. It's just the way it is. And running back contributes at a relatively high rate, 64%. Still not great. The rest are all in the 50% area. Center is the lowest among the non-quarterback offensive positions. Obviously, because it's very complicated. Just like quarterback, you have to make the blocking calls and identify the fronts and all of that kind of thing. So, normally speaking, they would not contribute at much better than a 50% ratio overall as a group. Running backs and outside rushers, edge rushers, probably have the better chance because they'll play one in specific circumstances. They won't play full time, and two, the position lends itself to just one skill necessarily, and so they'll have a chance to contribute at those positions. But other than that, I would say if you're looking for efficiency, you're not going to get it from a rookie player.
In terms of not having the preseason games, Bill, and I've been watching Giant practices since 2007 when they were up in Albany, and we had a receiver, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Sonoris Moss, where if you watch him in practice every day, you'd think the guy was a Pro Bowl wide receiver. Then you get the game situations, and the production wasn't necessarily there. So without these preseason games, how do you think GMs and coaches can figure out what guys are just really good in practice, and maybe it just might not translate to game situations?
You really don't know. You really don't know. With all the talk that there's been in the business about we don't need preseason, a lot of that is based on spectator and media viewpoints. If you ask the coaches, if you ask the general managers, if you ask the players even, they will tell you we need preseason, and now we're not going to have it. So that gamer that you brought along all the way through the preseason, he showed a little in the first game and a little more in the second and not so much in the third. And then you're using the fourth game to determine whether or not he can make the team and whether or not he can contribute. And all of a sudden he bursts out. And there's one every year for every team, sometimes more, is not going to get that opportunity. So he's going to be relegated to the back of the squad or the practice squad, and you're going to have to bring him along slowly and hope that if he's asked to go up to the varsity and contribute, he can do it. But you won't know. You won't get that epiphany that occurs in the preseason when you see this guy who you think has a chance step out on the field and all of a sudden, boom, he's a player.
What are some creative ways you think organizations and coaches, while working within the rules, of course, can try to get the guys ready from specifically a tackling perspective, I suppose, would be my biggest concern, given you're only going to have 2 weeks of contact practices, probably only a dozen, give or take, whenever the off days are going to be, leading up to that first regular season game?
Well, that's a very hard question. I think you've got to start by trying to be innovative with the use of dummies, perhaps the remote dummies or the movable dummies, where they travel on their own motor, other things like that. Perhaps pad up the offensive players in a greater way than you do now, so you can get a little more tackling in the 9-on-7 and 11-on-11 situations, and not risk injury. You're going to have to be really innovative. Maybe it's one-on-one stuff. I don't know. I would, if I were general manager, I would have sat down with the coaches knowing that this was going to be the case. I mean, this was not a revelation. I would have sat down with the coaches early in April and said, look, tell me what you think that the best drills we can use to improve and make sure we get efficient tackling. And, if you have to do a research project on it, if you have to talk to people around the country, high schools, colleges, whomever, do so. But you're going to have to be innovative because you're not going to get enough pure tackling work during those 14 or 12 days to really be crisp and ready on game day.
how do you think the transaction period towards the end of camp, when normally when you get past that third preseason game, and then you get obviously to the Saturday of Labor Day weekend, and you have everybody waived and they get picked back up on Sunday. Do you think there'll be fewer waiver claims this year because pro personnel won't have those preseason games to kind of pick players off of other rosters that they liked in those preseason settings? Will there be more trades where teams maybe are trading veterans from positions of strength to try to fill out their roster? How do you think this will impact that part of the transactional process before the season starts?
Well, we've never been here before, so this is just a guess on my part.
Of course.
we don't have any information to go on here, but I would think you may see trades where clubs have a surplus and another club needs people, either because they've lost guys to COVID during the preseason or because they just simply have a shortage. And so you may see more trades. I wouldn't rule that out. In terms of waiver claims, there may be some, but common sense would tell me without all that film to look at, the pro personnel departments are really going to be hampered in terms of making firm commitments and saying to the coach, listen, if we bring in Joe Blow, he's going to improve our team. We've seen him on tape enough. You'll get waiver claims, I suspect, on veteran players where there is tape and they have a history and a background. But in young players, I'd be surprised unless someone's just going on their old college scouting reports. I think there'll be less of that without the preseason.
Now, Bill, I think how they're going to assemble the practice squads for these teams is going to be fascinating. First of all, it's 16 players now. There's not as many limits in terms of veterans and things like that. And you figure with the risk of COVID, guys becoming infected, you want to have some guys that are going to step in and be ready to play. But at the same time, to your point earlier, it's going to be really hard to justify a bunch of undrafted free agents or even 6th or 7th round picks making the final 53 because they might not be ready to play, so you want to stash them on the practice squad, but maybe you don't want them to get claimed by waivers. So how do you kind of balance all those different factors when you try to put together that 16-man practice squad that best serves your team, not just for this year, but also for the future?
Well, first of all, this is in no way a criticism of John Mara, who I'm sure gave every effort he could, a Herculean effort to try and get this deal done. He was the lead guy for the management council, and I can't imagine how difficult that task was. In a perfect world, having said that, in a perfect world, which it isn't, the union had to obviously had their say, and they got any negotiation, you give a little and you get a little. So in a perfect world, I would have liked the practice squad to be frozen for the first 8 weeks of the season. You can release guys off it, in which case they're free, but no poaches and no waiver claims at the cut to 53. Now, that's a perfect world. I imagine there were probably some clubs who were opposed to that because they want to make waiver claims to improve themselves. Perfectly understandable. But this is such an untoward situation that I would have argued strongly for a frozen practice squad, at least for the first 8 weeks. We don't have it. So you're likely to get some waiver claims by clubs who simply say, we really don't have a shot at the playoffs this year. Let's try and build our team. And that's the way it's always been. So you're going to have to make strategic judgments as to who you carry down and then who you try to put on the practice squad after the final cuts have been made and the squads have been named. That goes on every year. So that's business as usual. I kind of expect that the first 3 draft choices, maybe a 4th or a 5th if they're or a lower round choice who really distinguishes himself in camp may make it, and the others will be put through waivers, and there'll be some claims, and then you'll build your practice squad from there. Having built it, then what you have to do in conjunction with injured reserve, because the injured reserve rules are very liberal. That's the balance for not having a frozen practice squad. If a player pulls a hamstring and misses 3 weeks of camp, you're going to put him on IR, and now you can practice him and bring him back. So that helps a little bit. But I think you'll see more guys going on IR, legitimately so, because to miss even one practice in this situation is difficult, much less 3 or 4 or 5. And then you'll probably see some waiver claims at the cut to 53 of young players if you expose them. But that's a strategic judgment that GMs and head coaches have to make every year. So that won't be any different than normal. I would have preferred different, but that's not the case. So whatever the rules are, you figure out how to make them work for you the most efficient way you can.
Final question on roster construction before we get to the Giants specifically, Bill. Is this going to be, when they get to the cut-down process, more of a coach-driven exercise because of the nature of what we're doing and they really need guys that are ready to play right away? Or do you think it's going to be business as usual where they're trying to do that normal balance of, what the front office and the scouts and guys' potential for the future with what the coaches need on the field now?
In my experience, at 53, the coach has the loudest voice. He's got to take the team on the field the following week. So you give him every benefit of the doubt. Secondly, there isn't as much disagreement on who to keep as the media likes to portray that there is. It might be over 1 or 2 guys, and you can iron that out. You can iron that out well prior to the cut to 53. But again, at that point, the coach typically has the loudest voice. This year, they're going to want to keep a lot of veterans. I can understand that, unless you were going to waive a first rounder or a second rounder or a young guy that you thought had oodles of upside. You probably keep those guys as the 52nd and 53rd guy. But the coach gets the majority of the people that he wants. That's been my experience.
All right, let's get to the Giants specifically, Bill. And they get to throw on top of the mess we just talked about the fact that they have a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator, and a second-year quarterback, all trying to figure things out without even touching the football field and really meeting in person, which is just the craziest thing you can imagine if you're trying to run a football team. So what kind of unique challenges do you think face the Giants this year, given all the changes they've undergone since the 2019 season?
Well, as the poem says, let me count the ways. Having said that, let me send along a message through you to all Giant fans. And since I root for my friends now and I'm no longer aligned, I root for the Giants every week because of John Mara and Dave Gettleman and so many more people with the organization that I really think extremely highly of. And I grew up a Giant fan anyway. So you've got football, hopefully. This is true of fan bases for everyone in the league, but more so for teams that are in a building phase like the Giants. You've got football. That's great. Lord knows we need it.
Yes, we do.
It's a tremendous respite and a tremendous relief during a time where we hear nothing but bad news. So we've got football. Be grateful for it. Let's hope we can keep it. Secondly, this team is a work in progress. And to think that a new coach and a new quarterback and a bunch of new players and new coordinators without OTAs, without extended training camp, without preseason, could play with any level of efficiency for perhaps the first half of the season is simply not true. I mean, there are too many hurdles to overcome here. And I'm not a defeatist. I'm not saying give up. I'm not saying write the season off. But don't expect this team to come firing out of the blocks as though they were the Tom Brady New England Patriots of yore. It's not going to happen. There are too many hurdles to overcome. That said, think like a general manager. As the season goes on, is the arrow up? Do you see signs of growth? Do you see this team getting better as the season goes along? Are they playing more crisply? Are they playing more efficiently? Are they playing good situational football? Is Daniel Jones growing in the job? Which obviously you saw signs of that toward the end of last year. If all that's happening, rejoice in it. You're on the right road. And I personally believe that it's going to happen. But out of the gates, take it easy, man. Relax.
Not to mention the fact that they get to open the season against the Steelers, Bears, 49ers, and Rams, 4 veteran teams that bring back their quarterbacks, all top 10 pass defenses. So the schedule makers did not exactly do them any favors, at least from the offensive side of the ball. And that kind of brings us to Daniel Jones, Bill. How do you evaluate his first season with the Giants, and what are you looking for from him in year number 2 as he tries to take that big leap?
Well, keep in mind that I've had Kerry Collins and Peyton Manning, so, been there, done that. The first year, you hope that he can get them lined up. You hope that he can get an understanding of the offense maybe by midseason. You hope that by the end of the season, he's got some confidence and chemistry going with 1 or 2 receivers. And you hope that by the end of the season, as you generally view him, the arrow is up. I think all of that was true with Daniel. And so now, in the second year, and by the way, without COVID, in a normal circumstance, the jump a player makes between his rookie year and his second year is the biggest jump he makes in professional football. That will not be true this year because these fellas have not had the advantage of OTAs. But having said that, Daniel has the advantage now of knowing what the league is about. Now he has to learn a new system. He's certainly bright enough, so I'm sure he's got that down. But now he has to go out on the field and execute that system. It'll be rocky at first. There are going to be bumps in the road. It happens. That's the way quarterbacks grow. Peyton led the league in interceptions his rookie year, and it wasn't until the last 4 games of the regular season where we really saw the Peyton Manning that he became. So the same is true with Daniel. This is a new coordinator, new offense, new head coach. He's got to adjust to it. He's had benefit of knowing the league and knowing what it's all about for a year. He's going to get better. And that's what you look for. I don't have the slightest doubt that he will. I think he's an outstanding prospect and on the way to becoming an outstanding quarterback. But it's a work in progress.
I think the X factor, Bill, and we've talked a lot about this on a lot of our shows here on Giants.com for the Giants this year, is going to be their pass defense. And as you well know, there are 2 facets to this. You invested a lot when you're in Indianapolis in your 2 edge rushers, Mathis and Freeney, and those guys screamed off the edge and went after the opposing quarterback. The Giants have a bunch of guys that can pressure the quarterback, but nobody is really a guy that can demand that sort of attention. Then in the back end, in the secondary, they signed James Bradbury, excellent cover corner. But the slot, the nickel, and the other outside spot is really going to be a competition between a bunch of young guys. So in the league now, you have to cover and stop the pass to win. How do you evaluate where the Giants stand defensively as they head into this year under Patrick Graham?
The way I evaluate it is let's talk at midseason and see where we are. When we finally find out who the starters are, who the guys are who fit into specific positions, how they're performing, it's I can give you a much better judgment from week 8 on than I can now. And then on top of that, they won't even have the preseason in order to get cohesive in the system. So again, this is a big work in progress, and we don't even know what the lineup's going to look like. And that may change 2, 3, 4 games into the season.
Do you think this will be a situation with the Giants where the offense is a little ahead of the defense because there's more continuity of personnel, or is it the other way around because maybe the offense obviously has more moving parts and is a little bit more complicated from a scheme standpoint than the defense is?
Well, one way to make the offense work is to block people and a lot of that is want to, and then hand the ball to Saquon.
Yeah, it helps.
So that helps greatly. So I would imagine that the offense may be a little bit further along in the early going because Saquon can do marvelous things if you give him even the slightest daylight, and Daniel's got an ability to do things in the passing game that really is pretty exceptional. So you got two, albeit young, but two guys with difference-making talent there. I don't know that we've seen difference-making talent necessarily emerge on the defensive side. I'm as anxious as you are, and all Giant fans are, to see it.
How do you think Jason Garrett's schemes will match up with what Daniel Jones does well? How do you think those guys will kind of weave together?
Jason Garrett, in my mind, was maybe the biggest offseason addition the Giants made. He's a terrific coach. I'll bet you a lot of Giant fans don't know this. The Dallas offense last year was number one in the league.
Yep, yards per game.
Yep, in almost every category. And his fingerprints were all over it. Can he turn Saquon into Dallas's running back? You bet he can, because Saquon has the same ability. The offensive line has got to perform and do its job. He's going to do wonders for Daniel, just as he did for Dak. And, I have the utmost confidence in Jason Garrett. That was a phenomenal pickup for the Giants.
Now, you're locked in. You talk to coaches and everybody around the league. So, Bill, you know a lot more about these up-and-coming assistants than we do, kind of looking on the outside in. What did you heard? What did you hear about Joe Judge before the Giants hired him? And what kind of head coach you think he's going to be? Because we haven't had a chance to see him in action yet.
No, you haven't. And really, we haven't either, except his exposure as the special teams coach of the Patriots. So let's start there. The Patriots figure out a way virtually every week, and almost always in the biggest games, to win on special teams. They're the most. They have the most game-changing plays on special teams than anybody in the league, including those with phenomenal return guys, like Kansas City, with Tyreek and people like that. Week in and week out, the Patriots special teams won the battle. And so that's a big check mark, because it tells you, A, that he can coach and get through to his players, and B, that he understands situational football. You can't work for Bill Belichick and not understand situational football. So those are two big check marks there. And then finally, he comes via Nick Saban. Nick Saban and Bill Belichick in your background is a pretty good pedigree as it is, if you did nothing else. So, he's used to winning. He's used to discipline. He's used to situational football. He's used to sound and solid defense. He's used to sound and solid offense. So he hasn't called the shots before, but the special teams coach is in front of the team as much or more than the head coach. And he speaks to everybody on the team, and he's got to motivate everybody on the team. So I was not surprised to hear from insiders around the league that his interview was dynamic. That didn't surprise me at all, because as a special teams coach, he has to be that way every week. So, the proof is in the pudding. We're going to find out, and he's going to be in the toughest media market in football. So that exacerbates his maiden voyage a little bit, but all signs point to a great hire. So we'll see. The proof is in the pudding. And he's going to make some mistakes. And Lord knows every coach does, and rookie coaches do a lot. But I think in the long run, they made the right decision.
Couple more quick questions with Bill Polian. Coach, Bill, I asked you about Jason Garrett, I should ask you about Patrick Graham, the Giants' addition of defensive coordinator. He held that job from Miami last year, comes over. What do you know about him from your time in the league, talking to people that have worked with him? He's been in the league for a long time, and what kind of scheme do you think he'll try to implement here with the Giants?
Well, I don't know. I think it's probably going to be it's probably going to have a two-gap base, I would guess, and multiple coverages in the secondary if the Miami experience is any barometer. But I'm as anxious as you are to see what the finished product looks like on opening day.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave Gettleman, he was a scout of yours during your time in Buffalo. I know you guys are still close. Dave always speaks very proudly of his time there, getting into all those Super Bowls with the Bills. Where do you see this team in terms of the stages of the building process, Bill, and how Dave has built them up and what needs to be done and just kind of where they are in that building process?
Well, first of all, there's nobody I think more highly of than Dave Gettleman. And he wasn't a scout of mine. He was a friend long before either of us got to the National Football League. So, I go back with him a long, long way and have the utmost faith in his judgment and direction. I think the Giants are a work in progress. They've got a young quarterback who shows a world of promise. They got a scintillating running back who can take over games. They've improved the offensive line, which was necessary. The defense is in effect an overhaul, so that's going to take time to put in place. They've had a little hiccup in the kicking game. They don't have necessarily a reliable guy there now that you can count on week in and week out. So it's a work in progress. But I think the question all Giant fans should ask themselves is, do I have faith in the track records of the guys who are in charge? John Mara, Dave Gettleman, the new coach, Coach Judge, Jason Garrett. Those guys all have outstanding track records, and that's a sure sign that you're on the road to success. Will there be bumps in the road? You bet. And of course, in New York, they'll be magnified. But the bottom line is that I have faith that the job's going to get done.